my lovely family. Thank you for sticking around with me through these times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. It's a money pit, Gabe, his ex-brother-in-law sneered, the words sharp as broken glass. But inside the decaying walls of the mansion, everyone mocked. Gabe Trinidad felt something else entirely, not the weight of a ruin, but the pull of a 100-year-old promise. The third period bell shrieked, a sound that grated on Gabe Trinidad's nerves like grinding gears. It was the sound of release for the 32 seventh graders in front of him, but for Gabe, it was just another signal of his own inertia. He was a substitute, a temporary fixture in a world that felt increasingly permanent in its impermanence. He stood at the front of the chaotic classroom, a worn-out copy of The Giver in his hand, feeling more like a spectator than an authority figure. "All right, settle down, everyone," he said, his voice a calm island in a sea of adolescent energy. It was a voice honed by years of practice, projecting a placidness he rarely felt. "Remember your reading for tomorrow. Chapters 5 and 6. And please, leave the desks in some semblance of order." Paper airplanes sailed past his head, landing softly against the chalkboard. He didn't flinch. He just watched it flutter to the floor, another small, symbolic defeat in a day full of them. He wore a corduroy jacket with soft, tweed patches on the elbows, one of which was starting to fray at the edges, a tiny detail he'd noticed that morning with a familiar, sinking feeling. His shoes, sensible and comfortable, were scuffed at the toes, the leather creased into a permanent expression of fatigue. Gabe wasn't just a substitute teacher. He was a substitute everything. A substitute for the teacher who was out on maternity leave. A substitute for the father, his ex-wife, Claire. A substitute for the man he'd once dreamed of, becoming the one with a steady job, a fixed address, and a future that wasn't perpetually being patched together with hope and duct tape. As the students stampeded out, a boy named Kevin, all elbows and nervous energy, lingered by the door. "Mr. T? I forgot my lunch money again." Gabe offered a small, tired smile. He slid open his own lunch bag, a brown paper sack, neatly folded at the top, and pulled out half a turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a slightly bruised apple. "Here," he said, pushing it toward the boy. "Take it. I'm not that hungry today." It was a lie, of course. A gnawing emptiness was already starting to churn in his stomach, but the look of relief on Kevin's face was worth more than the sandwich. It was a small act of providing, a minor success in a life that felt stacked with failures. He retreated to his temporary desk as the bell for his planning period rang. He sank into the squeaky chair, the silence of the empty classroom pressing in on him. On the corner of the desk sat his car keys, the plastic fob for his beat-up 2004 station wagon, chipped and faded. Next to them, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his shoulders tense instantly. Mark Jennings. His ex-brother-in-law, the architect of Claire's new, better life. He knew he shouldn't answer. Nothing good ever came from a conversation with Mark. But ignoring him was worse. It invited a barrage of texts, each one more condescending than the last. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the echoing hallway, a long corridor lined with faded blue lockers and the faint smell of disinfectant. "Mark," he answered, keeping his voice level. "Gabe, just the man I was looking for." Or The man I was forced to look for, anyway. Claire's been trying to reach you. The voice was slick, polished, dripping with the kind of effortless superiority that came from never having to check his bank balance before ordering a second round of drinks. My phone was on silent. I was teaching, Gabe said, the words sounding defensive, even to his own ears. Right. Teaching, Mark said, the word loaded with quotation marks. Listen, we need to talk about this situation. This house, your great-aunt left you. Gabe's grip tightened on the phone. The mansion. It had been the talk of the family for the past week, a subject of morbid fascination and thinly veiled ridicule. It's not a situation, Mark. It's an inheritance. A dry, humorless laugh crackled through the phone. An inheritance? Gabe, it's a pile of sticks waiting for a strong wind to knock it over. I saw the pictures. It's a liability, not an asset. Claire is worried sick. She thinks you're going to pour what little money you have into that black hole. Each word was a precise, calculated jab. Gabe closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cool metal of a locker. He could picture Mark perfectly, sitting in his leather office chair, staring out at a city skyline, casually dismantling Gabe's dignity between sips of espresso. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, Gabe said quietly. Let me decide for you. Sell it. Sell the land. Some developer will probably give you scrap value for the acreage. At least then you can pay off some of your debts. God knows you have enough of them. Seriously, what were you thinking, accepting it? Did you even look at the property tax assessment or the demolition notice on the gate? They're going to tear it down, whether you like it or not, and you'll be the one footing the bill. Demolition notice. Gabe's stomach plunged. He hadn't known about that. It's a money pit, Gabe, Mark sneered, his voice dropping into a tone of mock pity that was far more insulting than outright anger. The family's already calling Gabe's folly. Don't prove them right. For once, the line went dead. Mark hadn't even waited for a reply. Gabe stood there in the empty hallway, the silence now screaming with the echo of Mark's words. Gabe's folly. It was more than an insult. It was a branding. It felt like every mistake, every wrong turn, every failure had led him to this moment, to inheriting a ruin that perfectly symbolized the state of his own life. The shame was a physical thing, a heavy cloak that settled over his shoulders, threatening to suffocate him. He didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, bottomless weariness. He was a man drowning inches, and his family was standing on the shore, laughing. Have you ever felt judged by the very people who should have supported you? It's a silence that can feel louder than any argument. It makes you question every choice you've ever made. Share your experience in the comments below. Let's talk about how it feels to find strength when you feel most alone. 200 miles away, Dr. Alani Reed stared at a different kind of ruin, though one no less complete. It was a digital ghost, a three-dimensional scan of a collapsed 19th century warehouse displayed on the 40-inch monitor in her office. Her space was the antithesis of the chaos on her screen. The walls were a serene, minimalist white. Her desk, a slab of reclaimed birchwood, was immaculate. A single, perfect white orchid stood in a simple ceramic pot on the windowsill, its petals flawless. There was no clutter, no stray papers, no personal photographs. Her life was a study in controlled environments. Alani moved with an efficiency that bordered on surgical. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her notes appearing in neat, bulleted lists. Catastrophic failure of primary load-bearing trusses, evidence of advanced ferrous metal corrosion. inadequate foundation for soil composition. She diagnosed the building's death with the cool, detached precision of a coroner. It was her job. As a senior architectural historian for the State Preservation Office, she was the final word, the one who decided if a piece of history was worth saving or if it was simply history. Most of the time, she was the executioner. Her phone emitted a soft, professional chime. An email. She clicked it open without breaking her focus. Subject: Final Assessment and Demolition Recommendation, Thorn Manor, 1888. County Route 7, Oak Haven. She scanned the attached file, her eyes flicking over the preliminary report. Her lips pressed into a thin, straight line. Extensive water damage from roof failure. Compromised foundation due to root ingress, significant mold and termite infestation. She had seen this story 100 times before. A Gilded Age masterpiece, left to rot for decades. A romantic dream that had curdled into a structural nightmare. It's a clear-cut case, she murmured to the empty room. She picked up her desk phone, dialing her director. David, it's Alani. I have the Oak Haven file. Thorn Manor. Ah, yes. Old Thorn Place, his voice replied, warm and familiar. A real tragedy, that one. Elias Thorn was a genius in his day. The stories about that house. The stories don't pay for new support beams, David, Alani cut in, her tone polite but firm. From the initial surveys, it's a teardown. I'll drive up this afternoon to do the on-site verification, but I don't expect any surprises. I can have the final demolition order recommendation on your desk by morning. Always so efficient, Alani, he said with a sigh. Just take a good look around, will you? For old time's sake. Thorn was one of a kind. I will, she said, though what she meant was that she would document every crack, every patch of rot, every sagging floorboard with meticulous, emotionless detail. That was her gift. She saw the facts, not the phantoms. She dealt in the tangible world of stress fractures and decay, not in the hazy nostalgia of the good old days. It was safer that way. Emotions were unreliable. They were messy, illogical, and led to poor structural decisions, both in buildings and in life. She glanced briefly at a small silver picture frame on the corner of her bookshelf, which she kept turned face down. A flicker of something, a shadow of an old pain crossed her face before she blinked it away, her professional mask sliding perfectly back into place. An hour later, she was on the road, her practical gray sedan cruising smoothly along the highway. The GPS voice was a calm, reassuring presence in the quiet car. Her briefcase, containing her camera, laser measure, and a fresh clipboard, sat neatly on the passenger seat. She was heading toward a dying house, a place of endings, and she felt perfectly, comfortably at home in the certainty of it all. The final bell of the day released Gabe from his purgatory. He gathered his things and walked out to the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. He found his children, Leo and Maya, waiting for him by the curb, their backpacks pooled at their feet. Leo, at 12, had the serious, watchful eyes of a boy who understood more than he let on. He saw the slump in his father's shoulders, the forced brightness of his smile. Maya, at 8, was pure, unadulterated sunshine. She ran to him, her pigtails bouncing, and threw her arms around his waist. Dad, are we going to see the castle today? She asked, her voice fizzing with excitement. Gabe hugged her tight, burying his face in her hair. Her unwavering belief in him was both his greatest treasure and his heaviest burden. How could he tell her the castle was a ruin, that it was just another thing he couldn't fix? Yeah, squirt, he said, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. We're going to see the castle. Is it really a mansion? Leo asked, shouldering his backpack. He was more skeptical, more grounded. He was his father's son in that way. It was, Gabe said, unlocking the rattling doors of their old station wagon. Car smelled faintly of crayons and stale French fries. A long time ago. Your great-aunt Elspeth said the man who built it was a railroad tycoon. An inventor. A tycoon. Maya gasped from the back seat. Are we rich now? The innocent question was a gut punch. No, sweetie, Gabe said, his eyes on the rearview mirror, looking at his children, but seeing Mark's smug face. We're not rich. The drive out of the city was a slow transition from concrete and noise to rolling green hills and quiet country roads. As they got closer, the houses grew farther apart, the trees grew taller, their branches knitting together over the road to form a green tunnel. Leo was quiet, watching the world go by, while Maya provided a running commentary on every cow and quaint mailbox they passed. Dad, look, she shouted, pointing. Is that it? Gabe followed her finger, and his breath caught in his throat. It was. Perched on a low hill, set back from the road, was the silhouette of Thorn Manor. Even from a distance, it was a breathtaking catastrophe. It wasn't just a house. It was a sprawling, Gothic creature of sharp gables, towering turrets, and a wide, wraparound porch that sagged like a tired old man. Windows were boarded up or broken, like vacant eyes. The paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. It was grand and tragic all at once. He turned off the main road onto a gravel driveway, almost completely reclaimed by weeds. The car bumped and rattled until it reached the entrance, a magnificent, wrought-iron gate, rusted and choked with ivy. One side of the gate hung drunkenly from a single hinge. And there, slapped callously onto the ornate ironwork, was a bright yellow laminated sheet. A demolition notice. Mark was right. It was official. Gabe killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the sound of the wind sighing through the overgrown trees. He got out of the car, his feet crunching on the gravel. He stared at the house, a monument to decay, and felt the full weight of his folly settle upon him. This wasn't a fresh start. It was a gravestone. Whoa, Leo breathed from beside him, his skepticism momentarily replaced by awe. It's a real castle, Maya whispered, her face pressed against the car window. As Gabe reached out a hand to touch the cold, rusted iron of the gate, he heard the smooth crunch of tires on gravel behind him. A sleek, modern sedan, the color of a storm cloud, pulled to a stop. The engine cut off, and the driver's side door opened. A woman emerged. She was dressed in sharp, practical clothing, dark trousers, a tailored jacket, sensible boots. She moved with a clipped, no-nonsense efficiency, her eyes already scanning the mansion, cataloging its faults. In her hand, she held a clipboard like a shield. It was Dr. Alani Reed. Her gaze swept from the crumbling turret to the demolition notice, and finally to the man standing beside the beat-up station wagon. Her expression was unreadable, a blank slate of professionalism. Gabe looked back at her, the father of two in a failing car, the inheritor of a ruin. She was the woman with the clipboard, the embodiment of the cold, hard facts that were about to condemn his last, foolish sliver of hope. Their eyes met over the hood of her car, two strangers bound by the fate of the dying house that loomed between them. The air between them was thick with unspoken assumptions. Gabe was the hopeful, the sentimental pauper. Alani was the clinical executioner, the voice of cold, hard reality. The decaying mansion stood as their silent, gargantuan referee. "Dr. Reed," Gabe began, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "I'm Gabe Trinidad. My great-aunt, Elspeth, she left me the house." Alani gave a curt, professional nod. "I'm aware. I have the file." She tapped her clipboard, a gesture that felt like a shield being tapped by a sword. "I'm here to conduct the final structural assessment for the county. It's a formality before the demolition order is finalized." Every word was a perfectly polished stone, dropped into the quiet pool of his anxiety. Final. Formality. Demolition. "Right," Gabe said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Well, these are my kids, Leo and Maya." Maya, who had been hiding behind Gabe's legs, peeked out and gave a shy wave. Leo just gave a slight, suspicious nod, his eyes flicking from Alani's stern face to the menacing yellow notice on the gate. He was old enough to read the writing on the wall, both literally and figuratively. "If you'll give me the keys, Mr. Trinidad," Alani said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, "I'll begin my walkthrough. I need to document the interior decay. You and your children should probably wait outside. The air quality in these places is compromised, and there are significant safety hazards." "We're coming with you," Gabe said, a spark of defiance cutting through his weariness. This was his house, his folly. He would see it through to the end. "I want to see it. We'll be careful." Alani's lips thinned, but she didn't argue. She knew a losing battle when she saw one. Gabe fumbled with the large antique iron key Elspeth's lawyer had given him. It was heavy, ornate, and felt like it belonged to a different century. After a moment of struggling with the rusted lock, the heavy oak door groaned open with the sound of a deep, painful sigh, releasing a breath of air that smelled of damp earth, decaying paper, and 100 years of secrets. They stepped inside. The foyer was a scene of magnificent ruin. A grand staircase, its balustrade intricately carved with what looked like vines and birds, swept upwards into the gloom. But several of the steps were missing, and the entire structure sagged ominously to one side. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed in from a fractured stained glass window high above, painting the floor in faded jewels of red and blue. To Alani, it was a beautiful, terminal illness. She immediately began her work, her voice a detached monotone as she spoke into a small digital recorder. "Foyer. Evidence of severe water ingress from second-floor failure. Central staircase is non-weight-bearing, immediate collapse hazard." She aimed a small laser measure at the ceiling. Ceiling joists show warping of approximately 15 degrees. Unsafe. Gabe flinched with every word. Each clinical observation felt like a personal insult, a confirmation of Mark's mockery. But Maya saw none of it. Her eyes were wide with wonder. "Daddy, it's a castle," she whispered, her voice full of reverence. She reached out a tentative finger and touched a patch of peeling gilded wallpaper. "It's made of gold." "Just gold paint, sweetie," Gabe said softly, but a part of him cherished her perspective. She saw the dream, not the decay. They moved into the parlor, a vast room with a collapsed marble fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows that were now just jagged mouths of broken glass. A fine layer of greenish mold crept up the walls like a slow-motion tide. "Parlor," Alani dictated. "Extensive black mold contamination. Subfloor is completely rotted through near the west wall. Do not approach." She took a photograph, the flash illuminating the cavern of decay for a stark, brutal second. Leo, ever the pragmatist, nudged his dad. "She's right, Dad. This place is falling apart." Mark was right. The words, spoken in his son's earnest voice, stung more than anything Mark himself could have said. "Just give it a minute, Leo," Gabe whispered, though he wasn't sure what he was asking for. "A miracle, maybe?" As Alani continued her methodical assassination of his inheritance, a low rumble sounded in the distance. The sky outside the broken windows began to darken, the afternoon light turning a bruised, heavy gray. A sudden gust of wind howled through the house, rattling a loose shutter somewhere upstairs, like a restless ghost. Then came the first drops of rain. Fat, heavy splats against the remaining panes of glass. Within moments, it was a downpour, a torrential drumming that filled the silence and seemed to make the old house shudder. And with the rain came the drip. It started as a soft plink, clink, clink in the corner of the room. Gabe saw it first. A dark, spreading stain on the ceiling, from which a single drop of water was falling onto a section of ornate floral wallpaper below. The drip landed just above a small wooden crate, sitting against the wall, one of the few things his great-aunt's lawyer had said was left inside. It was marked Elspeth's memories. The drip quickened, becoming a steady trickle. The water ran down the wall, soaking the delicate century-old paper. "Oh, no," Gabe muttered, moving toward it. He had to stop it. It felt profoundly important that this one small corner of the house, this box of memories, be protected from the onslaught. He looked up, trying to see the source. The ceiling plaster was sagging, heavy with water. Alani glanced over, her expression unchanged. "Roof failure. It's compromised throughout the entire east wing. I'd recommend we vacate the premises, Mr. Trinidad. The structural integrity is unpredictable during heavy rain." But Gabe wasn't listening. He was focused on the box. He slid it away from the wall, but the water was now streaming down, pooling on the floor. He felt a surge of irrational, desperate frustration. He couldn't fix his life. He couldn't fix his finances, but maybe, just maybe, he could fix this one leak. He looked around for something, anything. His eyes landed on a piece of heavy, carved molding that had fallen from the ceiling, lying amidst the debris on the floor. It was solid oak. Acting on pure instinct, he picked it up. It felt heavy, substantial in his hands. "What are you doing?" Alani asked, her voice sharp with alarm. "I'm going to see where the water is getting through the wall," he said, more to convince himself than her. He wedged the end of the molding into a crack in the plaster near the leak. "Mr. Trinidad, don't," she commanded. "You'll only make it worse. This is a historical structure, what's left of it. You can't just start prying at the walls." Her words, historical structure, were meant to be a reprimand, but they landed differently in Gabe's mind. It wasn't just a ruin. It was history. And his great-aunt had left it to him. A surge of ownership, fierce and protective, coursed through him. "It's my wall," he said, and with a grunt, he put his weight into it. The sound of cracking plaster echoed in the room, loud and violent. A large section of the damp wallpaper and the lath behind it crumbled and fell away, crashing to the floor in a cloud of dust and decay. "Dad!" Leo shouted, startled. "See?" Alani said, her voice tight with exasperation. "Now you have an even bigger problem." But Gabe wasn't looking at the hole. He was looking at what was in the hole. It wasn't just more rotting wood and insulation. The falling plaster had revealed a solid, dark panel beneath, made of a wood so deep and rich it seemed to drink the gloomy light. It was mahogany, he thought, polished and smooth and utterly untouched by the decay around it. And carved into its surface was a breathtakingly intricate design. It wasn't random. It was a perfect circular chart, about 3 feet in diameter. Stars, planets, and crescent moons were carved into the wood with an artist's precision. Delicate lines connected them, forming constellations he had never seen before. In the center was a stylized sun, its rays extending to the edge of the circle. It wasn't just a decoration. It was deliberate. It was hidden. It was a secret. The room fell silent, the only sound, the drumming of the rain outside. The air shifted. Tension of conflict dissolved, replaced by a shared electric sense of astonishment. Gabe took a hesitant step forward, reaching out a hand. He wiped away the dust from the carving, his fingers tracing the smooth, raised lines of a constellation that looked like a bird in flight. It was cool to the touch. Real. What? What is this? He whispered, the question hanging in the air, directed at no one and everyone. Alani was frozen for a long moment, her clipboard held loosely at her side. Her professional mask had finally completely cracked. The historian in her had overridden the assessor. She took a step closer, her eyes wide, scanning the carving with an intensity that bordered on reverence. That's impossible, she breathed. She wasn't looking at Gabe. She was looking at the wall, at the anomaly, at the beautiful, illogical thing that shouldn't be there. The blueprints for this house are in the county archives. I've studied them. There's no mention of a mahogany relief panel in the parlor. This isn't part of the original design. This is something else. Maya, her earlier fear gone, crept forward. It's a treasure map, Dad, she declared with the unshakable certainty of an 8-year-old. Just like in the movies. Leo, drawn in by the mystery, pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining a bright, focused beam onto the carving. The light caught the polished edges of the wood, making the hidden stars gleam. Who would hide this inside a wall? He asked, his voice full of the wonder he'd been trying so hard to suppress. Alani slowly raised her camera and took a picture, the flash once again illuminating the room. But this time, it wasn't documenting decay. It was documenting a discovery. She lowered the camera, her gaze shifting from the impossible star chart on the wall to Gabe's face. She was no longer looking at a foolish, desperate man. She was looking at the inheritor of a mystery. The rain continued to pour, a relentless rhythm against the roof, but inside the crumbling parlor, the world had gone still. The demolition order, the structural reports, the cold, hard facts, they all seemed to fade into the background, rendered insignificant by the profound, unspoken question that now filled the space between them. What did it mean? The immediate aftermath of the discovery was a fragile truce held in the dusty, rain-soaked air. The carving on the wall was an undeniable fact, a beautiful, confounding object that temporarily silenced all arguments. But as the rain softened from a roar to a gentle patter, the spell began to break, and their ingrained roles began to reassert themselves. Alani was the first to retreat to the safety of her professional skepticism. She lowered her camera, her mind racing to categorize the anomaly, to fit it into a neat academic box where it could be safely contained. It's folk art, she said, the words precise and deliberate, as if testing a hypothesis. Likely a later edition. Someone who lived here in the mid-20th century, perhaps. A hobbyist woodcarver with a flair for the astronomical. She was talking to herself as much as to Gabe. Gabe shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the intricate woodwork. He ran his hand over a carving of a spiraling galaxy. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. This wood, It's the same as the paneling in the library. It feels old. It feels like it belongs here. He couldn't explain it logically, but the feeling was overwhelming. It was an instinct, deep and resonant, a gut-level certainty that defied explanation. Feelings aren't evidence, Mr. Trinidad, Alani countered, her tone gentler now, but still insistent on the boundary between fact and fantasy. It's remarkable, I'll grant you that. But it doesn't change the reality of the situation. It doesn't fix the foundation or the roof. She gestured around the decaying room, at the water still dripping into a growing puddle, at the mold, at the broken windows. The house was still dying, even with this beautiful secret in its heart. "The rain is letting up," she announced, her professionalism fully restored. She looked at Gabe, a hint of warning in her eyes. "My initial assessment stands. This is a fascinating find for the historical record, but it's an isolated piece of art in a condemned building. My recommendation to the county will have to reflect that. Please don't touch anything else until a proper team can see it. Don't get your hopes up." With a final, lingering look at the star chart, a look that betrayed more curiosity than she would ever admit, she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. Gabe watched her go, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and resolve. She had seen the miracle, but had chosen to see the math. The drive home was a study in contrasts. Maya was buzzing in the back seat, drawing imaginary star maps on the foggy window with her finger. "We're going to find the treasure, Dad." "I know it. The map will show us where the X is." Leo, however, was quiet. His earlier excitement curdled back into a thoughtful skepticism. "She's the expert, Dad," he said finally, his voice small. "What if she's right? What if it's just some old carving?" Gabe met his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. He saw his own doubts reflected there. "I don't know, Leo," he answered honestly. "But your great-aunt didn't leave me an old carving. She left me a house, and that's inside it. I have to believe it means something." He was resisting the logical conclusion, the sensible path that everyone marked, the county, the expert historian was pointing him toward. He was clinging to the one piece of evidence that suggested his life wasn't just a series of unfortunate events, that there might be a hidden design he couldn't yet see. The next morning, the world's logic arrived with a hammer. A man in a fluorescent yellow vest and a county logo polo shirt pulled up in a white pickup truck. He was cheerful, impersonal, and utterly implacable. "Gabe Trinidad?" he asked, holding a clipboard of his own. "Yes," Gabe said, standing on the cracked front porch of his small rental house. "Just here to post the official notice. 30-day order for demolition on the Thorn property. Standard procedure." He wasn't unkind, just a cog in a machine that had already been set in motion. He walked over to the front door and, with 2 sharp raps of his hammer, tacked a duplicate of the demolition notice right next to Gabe's doorbell. The sound was deafening. It was an eviction notice for a dream he had only just allowed himself to have. The 30-day countdown had begun. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. It was his sister, Sharon. Her voice, usually sharp and critical, was syrupy with feigned concern. "Gabe, honey, I heard about the demolition notice. Mark called Mom and Dad, and we're all just so worried about you." Gabe closed his eyes. "I'm fine, Sharon. Are you, though? Because it sounds like you're getting yourself into another situation." "You've always been such a dreamer, Gabe. Remember that little bookstore you tried to open? You poured everything into it, and we all told you it was a long shot." The mention of the bookstore was a low blow, a targeted strike at his most painful failure. He had sunk his savings into it, a cozy little corner shop filled with second-hand books. It had lasted 11 months. "This is different," he said, his voice tight. "How is it different? It's another money pit. You're getting the kids' hopes up over a pile of rotting wood. You have to be realistic, for their sake. Let it go. Take the loss and move on before you end up with a bill for the demolition crew. There's something there, Sharon. In the house. Something no one knew about." A weary sigh came through the phone. It was the sound of a patience he knew was entirely manufactured. "Oh, Gabe, please don't do this to yourself. There's no secret treasure. There's no magic solution. It's just a broken-down house. Let the professionals handle it. It's what's best for everyone." He hung up the phone, feeling smaller than he had in years. The weight of his family's collective disbelief was crushing. They saw him as a child playing make-believe, a fool chasing fantasies. His resistance was wavering, the single bright image of the star chart beginning to flicker under the onslaught of their doubt. Meanwhile, back in her sterile white office, Dr. Alani Reed was finding it impossible to resist the pull of the mystery. The photograph of the carving was open on her large monitor, a vibrant splash of chaos in her orderly world. She had already written most of her report, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she detailed the mansion's terminal state. Recommendation is for immediate and total demolition, following the standard 30-day public notice period. The structure is unsalvageable. But she hadn't submitted. She kept zooming in on the photo, her brow furrowed in concentration. It wasn't folk art. The precision was too great, the symbolism too coherent. The constellations were bizarre, yet they followed an internal logic she couldn't decipher. It wasn't in any of her reference books on local architectural flourishes or Gilded Age ornamentation. She ran a search on Elias Thorne, the original owner, but found only the standard biographical data: railroad tycoon, inventor, recluse. Nothing about woodworking, astrology, or secret panels. It was a loose thread, and her entire professional life was dedicated to weaving loose threads into a complete tapestry. This one, however, refused to be woven. It snagged, it pulled, it threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about the house. Her frustration grew. She was a woman who dealt in answers, and this was a question that was growing louder and more insistent in the quiet of her office. She stood up and paced, her sensible boots making soft, rhythmic sounds on the polished concrete floor. She looked at the downturned picture frame on her bookshelf, a reminder of a time when emotion had blindsided her, when a story she'd believed in had turned out to be a lie. She had sworn off such entanglements. Facts, data, evidence, that's what she trusted now. And the fact was, the carving existed. Her phone rang, startling her. It was an unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but some impulse made her answer. "Hello, Dr. Reed's office." There was a pause on the other end. "Dr. Reed? It's Gabe Trinidad." Her posture stiffened. She walked back to her desk, her eyes immediately finding the image on her screen. "Mr. Trinidad," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm sorry to bother you at your office," he said, and he sounded tired, his earlier defiance worn down to a nub. "I know what you said about not getting my hopes up, and I know about the 30-day notice. But I was wondering, you're the expert. I was just wondering if you'd found anything in your books about that thing on the wall." He sounded like a man on a ledge, asking if the ground was as far away as it looked. Alani's internal walls went up. This was exactly the kind of messy, emotional entanglement she avoided. He was asking her for hope, a commodity she didn't trade in. As I said, Mr. Trinidad, it's most likely a non-structural artistic addition from a later period. It's an anomaly, but it has no bearing on the building's integrity. I know, he said quickly. I know that. But it's not just art. It feels like a language I don't understand. You're the only other person who's seen it. The only one who might be able to translate. The word hung in the air between them. Translate. She should have said no. She should have reiterated her professional opinion, advised him to speak to the county, and ended the call. It was the logical, sensible, safe thing to do. But as she stared at the glowing stars on her monitor, at the beautiful, impossible puzzle that Elias Thorne had hidden in his wall, the historian in her won a small but decisive victory over the pragmatist. She sighed, a quiet breath of resignation. Her resistance was cracking. "Send me a high-resolution file of the photo you took, Mr. Trinidad," she said, her voice clipped. "All business. The one with your son's flashlight. I need to see the details more clearly. I'm not promising anything, but I'll look at it again." It wasn't a yes. But for Gabe, standing in the deepening gloom of his own doubt, it wasn't a no either. It was a lifeline. The lifeline Alani had offered, however thin, was all Gabe needed. He spent the evening poring over the pictures on his phone, zooming in, adjusting the contrast, trying to sharpen the image of the star chart. He sent Alani the best one, a shot Leo had taken with the flashlight, held at a perfect 45-degree angle, illuminating the carvings in sharp relief. But he knew it wasn't enough. A photo couldn't capture the feeling of the wood, sheer impossible presence of the thing. He had to go back. He packed a bag the next afternoon, 2 powerful flashlights, a crowbar he'd borrowed from a neighbor, a bottle of water, and a bag of granola bars. He picked up the kids from school, the demolition notice on his own front door, a constant mocking reminder of the ticking clock. "We're going back to the castle, aren't we?" Maya asked, her voice a conspiratorial whisper as she buckled herself in. "We are," Gabe confirmed. "Just for a little while. I need to take some better pictures for the doctor." Leo was less enthused. "The one who wants to tear it down? She's a historian, Leo. She just needs more information," Gabe said, trying to convince himself as much as his son. As they pulled up the weed-choked driveway, Gabe was surprised to see the familiar gray sedan already parked near the gate. Alani was standing by her car, her arms crossed, staring up at the house. She wasn't wearing her professional jacket, just a simple black sweater. She looked smaller, somehow less formidable without her armor. She turned as he approached, her expression a mixture of annoyance and something else he couldn't quite name. "Mr. Trinidad, I was just about to leave." "Dr. Reed, what are you doing here?" "Your photograph was insufficient," she stated, her voice clipped. "The pixelation obscures the finer tooling marks. I needed to take my own high-resolution shots for the archival record." "It's a formality." Gabe knew a flimsy excuse when he heard one. He made them for a living. She wasn't here for a formality. She was here because, like him, she couldn't stay away. The puzzle had its hooks in her, too. A strange, unspoken understanding passed between them. They were co-conspirators now, bound by a shared obsession. Without another word, he unlocked the heavy front door, and they stepped back into the decaying grandeur of Thorne Manor. The sky outside had taken on a strange, bruised purple hue. The air was heavy and still, the calm before a storm. Neither of them paid it much mind. They were focused on the parlor. Alani had brought her own equipment. She set up a portable tripod, mounting a professional camera with a large lens. Gabe held a flashlight for her, angling the beam exactly where she told him. For a while, the only sounds were the click of the camera shutter and her quiet instructions. A little to the left. Hold it steady. Good. They worked in a strange, focused harmony. The kids sat quietly on the dusty floor, watching the two adults with wide eyes, sensing the shift in their dynamic. The tension from their first meeting was gone, replaced by a shared purpose. As Alani reviewed the images on her camera's small screen, a low, distant rumble echoed through the house. "What was that?" Maya asked, looking up at the stained glass window. "Just thunder, sweetie," Gabe said, but a prickle of unease ran down his spine. The light outside was fading fast, the air growing thick and oppressive. The thunder rumbled again, closer this time, a deep, guttural growl. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed through a broken window, sending a whirlwind of dust and dead leaves spiraling through the room. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. "Okay, that's it. We need to go," Alani said, quickly packing her camera. "This old-growth forest is the last place you want to be in a lightning storm." But it was too late. The sky opened up. The rain didn't just fall, it crashed down, a solid wall of water that blurred the world outside and drummed against the dilapidated roof with the force of 1,000 fists. It was a storm of a different magnitude than the last one, fiercer, angrier. Then came a sound that wasn't rain or thunder. A groaning, splintering crack from directly above them. Gabe looked up. A long, dark fissure was racing across the parlor ceiling. Plaster dust rained down on them. "MOVE!" Gabe roared, grabbing both his children and pulling them back, just as Alani shouted, "GET, a W, a YFROMTHE, CENTER." A heartbeat later, the ceiling gave way. A massive section of plaster, rotted beams, and roofing material crashed down onto the very spot where they had been standing seconds before, exploding on the floor in a percussive blast of debris and decay. The impact shook the entire house, and a thick, choking cloud of dust filled the air. Gabe held his children tight, his body shielding them, his heart hammering against his ribs. He coughed, his lungs full of grit. "Is everyone okay?" he yelled into the whiteout. "We're okay, Dad," Leo coughed, his voice trembling. Maya was crying softly, her face buried in Gabe's jacket. "Alani?" Gabe shouted, his voice raw with panic. "Dr. Reed, I'm here," a voice called out from near the doorway. "I'm all right." As the dust began to settle, he saw her silhouette. She was leaning against the doorframe, her face pale, a streak of dirt across her cheek. Her composure was gone, replaced by the same raw shock he felt. Another groan echoed from the floor above, a sound of immense weight shifting precariously. "This room isn't safe," Alani said, her voice shaking but regaining its authority. "The whole east wing is compromised." The library, it was built as a fireproof annex. Reinforced walls, separate foundation. "It's our best chance." Gabe didn't question her. He scooped Maya into his arms, grabbed Leo's hand, and followed Alani as she led them out of the ruined parlor and down a short, dark hallway. The library doors were massive, solid oak reinforced with iron straps. Alani put her shoulder into it, and Gabe added his weight. With a deep groan, the doors swung open. They stumbled inside and pushed the doors shut, the sound of the raging storm and the groaning house instantly muffled. They were in a pocket of profound, echoing silence. The library was a breathtaking sight. 2 stories of bookshelves soared up to a coffered ceiling, a testament to Elias Thorne's love of knowledge. While dust lay thick as velvet on every surface, the room itself felt solid. A massive, unlit fireplace stood at one end, its mantelpiece carved from a single piece of dark stone. It felt like a sanctuary, the strong, beating heart of the dying house. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaky exhaustion in its wake. Maya's sobs subsided into hiccups. Leo leaned against his father, his small body trembling. Gabe gently set Maya down and knelt in front of her. "You were so brave, sweetie. It's okay now. We are safe here." Alani stood by the door, her back to them, her hands braced against the wood. Her shoulders rose and fell with each deep, steadying breath. She was reassembling herself, brick by brick. Gabe walked over to her. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice low. She turned, and for the first time, he saw not Dr. Reed, the state historian, but Alani, a woman who had just been terrified. Her eyes were wide, her professional mask completely gone. "His private collection was said to be fireproof," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I read it in a footnote. I never thought," she trailed off, shaking her head. "You saved us," Gabe said simply. "Your footnote saved us." He rummaged in his bag and pulled out the bottle of water. He opened it and handed it to her. "Here." She took it, their fingers brushing for a moment. It was a small, simple contact, but in the charged atmosphere of the room, it felt significant. "Thank you," she murmured, and took a long drink. They were no longer Mr. Trinidad and Dr. Reed. The storm and the near disaster had stripped those formalities away. They were Gabe and Alani, 2 adults responsible for 2 scared children, trapped together in a place outside of time. Leo, recovering his nerve, walked deeper into the room, running his flashlight beam over the spines of the leather-bound books. "Wow," he breathed. "He must have read all of these." "He probably did," Alani said, her voice regaining some of its familiar academic tone. Elias Thorne wasn't just a tycoon. He was a polymath. He held patents in engineering, metallurgy, even optics. She had moved from fear to facts, her natural safe harbor. But something was different. She wasn't lecturing, she was sharing. She was looking at the books with the same wonder as Leo. Gabe watched her, a new understanding dawning. Beneath the layers of professional detachment and cautious skepticism, there was a woman who was deeply, passionately in love with the past. The mansion wasn't just a case file to her. It was a story she desperately wanted to read. The storm raged on outside, a wild, elemental force. But inside the library, a fragile peace settled. They were reluctant allies, trapped by circumstance in the heart of the mystery. The crumbling walls of the mansion had forced them together, and in the shared silence of the dusty, forgotten library, the first, tentative foundations of trust were being laid. The library was an island of stillness in a sea of chaos. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but the thick stone walls and solid oak doors muted its rage to a distant, rhythmic drumming. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old paper and leather. The 4 of them were adrift in time, the immediate terror of the collapse giving way to a shared, shaky sense of survival. Gabe had found a few thick, felt blankets in a wooden chest near the fireplace, and he wrapped one around Maya, who had curled up on a dusty but intact leather sofa, her eyes finally fluttering shut. She was exhausted, the day's adventure finally catching up to her. Alani stood by one of the towering bookshelves, her analytical gaze sweeping over the rows of leather-bound spines. The historian in her had taken over completely, a coping mechanism that was both a comfort and a necessity. She was mapping the room, organizing it in her mind, searching for logic in the beautiful, dusty chaos. It was Leo who broke the silence. He had taken one of the flashlights and was conducting his own quiet exploration, his beam dancing across the shelves like a curious firefly. "Dad," he whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "Look at this." Gabe and Alani turned. Leo was pointing his light at the very top shelf of a section dedicated to astronomy and celestial mechanics. Most of the books were thick, uniform volumes, bound in dark green leather. But one was different. It was a deep, vibrant crimson, its spine unadorned with the gold-leaf titles of its neighbors. It was also thinner and seemed to be pushed in just a fraction of an inch deeper than the others. It was an imperfection, a deliberate anomaly in an otherwise perfect set. "It's out of place," Alani murmured, walking over to stand beside Leo. She tilted her head, her expert eye assessing the book. "It doesn't match the binding of the rest of the collection. It almost looks like a dummy." What?" Gabe asked, joining them. "A false book," she explained, her voice quickening with excitement. "A common trope in stories, but they were a real thing. A hiding place in plain sight. The shelf was a good 15 feet up." "I'll get it," Gabe said, dragging the heavy, rolling library ladder from the corner. It creaked in protest as he climbed, the old wood groaning under his weight. He reached the top, his head level with the highest shelf, and carefully slid the crimson book from its place. It was lighter than he expected. And as Alani had suspected, it wasn't a book at all. The pages were a solid block of wood, fused together. It was a box, cleverly disguised. He ran his fingers over it. There was no visible hinge, no clasp, no lock. The spine, where a title should have been, was smooth except for a single, small brass inlay. He climbed down and handed the box to Alani. She examined the inlay under the beam of Leo's flashlight. It was a carving, no bigger than a thumbnail, a stylized bird with its wings spread wide, soaring upwards. "I've seen this before," she breathed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers swiping rapidly through the photos she'd just taken. She stopped on a close-up of the star chart from the parlor. She zoomed in on one of the unfamiliar constellations. There it was, an exact match. A constellation made of 7 stars, connected by carved lines to form the shape of a soaring bird. "It's a key," Gabe realized, a jolt of electricity running through him. "The star chart is the key." Alani looked from the phone to the box, her mind working furiously. The constellation has 7 stars. Maybe it's a pressure lock. We have to press the stars in the right sequence. They gathered around a small table, placing the box in the center. Gabe held a flashlight while Alani and Leo studied the image on the phone. "The bird is flying up," Leo pointed out. "So maybe you start from the tail and go to the head?" It was as good a theory as any. Alani looked at the image, her finger tracing the pattern on the screen. "Okay, the tail star is the dimmest. Then the body, then the wings, then the head is the brightest." She looked up at Gabe. "Your turn." "My hands are shaking." Gabe nodded, his own heart thudding. This felt monumental. He took a deep breath and gently pressed his finger onto the star chart in the photo, mimicking the sequence on the wooden box. He imagined the feel of the cool, carved mahogany under his fingertips. He pressed the locations on the smooth wood where the stars should be, following Leo's logic: tail, body, wings, head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For a moment, nothing happened. A heavy wave of disappointment washed over him. Then, with a soft, satisfying click, a hidden seam appeared along the edge of the pages. The box had opened. They leaned in together. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded black velvet, was a single object, a thick journal, its leather cover worn smooth with time and handling. It was bound shut with a simple leather tie. Gabe reached in and lifted it out. It felt warm, personal. He carefully untied the leather strap and opened it to the first page. The handwriting inside was elegant, precise, but with a passionate slant to the letters. The ink was faded from black to a soft brown. September 12, 1898, the first entry began. "Will you read it?" Gabe asked Alani, his voice hushed. "You'll probably make out the writing better than I can." Alani nodded, taking the journal from him with a reverence she usually reserved for museum artifacts. She positioned the flashlight, took a breath, and began to read aloud. Her voice, stripped of its clinical edge, was now the conduit for a man who had been silent for a century. "My dearest Isabel," she began, "they have told me you are gone. Not from this world, but from mine, which is the same thing. They have shipped you off to Europe, to a man with a title and a bloodline as cold and empty as his heart. They say it is for the good of your family. They say I am not our kind. They are right. I am not. My hands are calloused from work, not from wearing gloves. My fortune was built on steel and steam, not on the inherited glories of forgotten ancestors. But my heart, Isabel, my heart was built by you." A profound silence descended upon the library, broken only by Alani's voice and the distant patter of rain. This wasn't the journal of a reclusive tycoon. It was a love letter. Alani continued, her voice softening as the story unfolded. Elias Thorne was not the villain of his own story, but the victim. The love of his life was Isabel, a brilliant, spirited astronomer and artist who saw the universe not as a thing to be conquered, but as a poem to be read. She was the one who had designed the star chart. It wasn't a map to treasure. It was a map of the heavens on the night he proposed to her, a gift she had carved herself. "She saw the patterns the rest of us miss," Alani read, her voice thick with emotion. "She said the world was full of secrets, hidden in plain sight, waiting only for a heart patient enough to look. The greedy see only gold. The cynical see only decay. But the hopeful see the stars." The journal chronicled his heartbreak after her family forced her away. He had poured his grief and his fortune into the mansion, turning it into a sanctuary filled with the things they both had loved. It was a fortress against a world that valued pedigree over passion. Then came the final entry, written 30 years later, not long before his death. The handwriting was shakier, the ink darker. "This house has been my tomb," Alani read, her voice cracking slightly. "But it does not have to be its legacy. My fortune is a curse. It has brought me nothing but isolation. I will not leave it to the wolves, to the men of finance and law who would pick my bones clean. So I have created a test, a puzzle not of the mind, but of the heart. I have hidden my legacy inside these walls, but the path is not marked by cleverness or strength. It is marked by the symbols of my love for her. It is a path that can only be followed by someone who understands that a wall can hide more than pipes, that a house can be more than an asset, that a family can be more than a name." Alani looked up from the journal, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She read the final, damning lines. Therefore, let my fortune not go to the cleverest mind or the strongest hand, but to the most steadfast heart. Let it go to the one who understands that a home is not built of wood and stone, but of shared hopes and sheltered love. Let it find someone who is willing to fix that which is broken. Gabe felt the words like a physical blow. Fix that which is broken. It was his entire life. The bookstore, his marriage, himself, and now this house. He looked at his son, whose eyes were wide with a new kind of understanding, and at Maya, sleeping peacefully, the embodiment of a sheltered love. He then looked at Alani. The wall between them, the wall of professionalism, of cynicism, of facts versus feelings, had not just been breached, it had been leveled. She was looking at him, not as a case file, but as a man. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of the same stunning revelation he felt. The quest was no longer about a $500 million discovery. It wasn't about proving Mark and his family wrong. It was about honoring a legacy. It was about proving Elias Thorne right. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. In the quiet, dusty library, surrounded by the ghosts of a tragic love story, a new, fragile connection was beginning to form, built not on proximity, but on a profound and deeply shared purpose. The dawn that followed the storm was quiet and crystalline. The world outside the library's dusty windows seemed reborn, washed clean and glistening. The air inside the mansion was still, but it was a different kind of stillness now, not of decay, but of reverence. The ghost of Elias Thorne was no longer a vague presence. He was a tragic, romantic figure whose story now infused every shadow and dust mote. They emerged from the library like survivors from a shipwreck, blinking in the new light. The parlor was a disaster zone, the gaping hole in the ceiling a stark reminder of their close call. But instead of despair, Gabe felt a surge of purpose. He wasn't just patching leaks anymore. He was a custodian of Thorne's legacy. Over the next few days, a new unspoken rhythm developed between them. Alani, citing the need for thorough archival documentation before the demolition crew could be scheduled, made the mansion her temporary office. She arrived each morning in her practical sedan, but now she brought a large thermos of coffee and a bag of pastries, which she would share with Gabe and the kids on the sagging front porch. The formality between them evaporated, replaced by an easy, collaborative energy. They were a team. Guided by the clues in Thorne's journal, they began to unravel the house's secrets together. "He writes here about the western lights showing the way," Alani said one afternoon, poring over the journal at the dusty dining room table. Leo and Maya were on the floor, attempting to reassemble a broken piece of a decorative plaster ceiling rose like a giant puzzle. Gabe looked toward the west wall of the dining room. "The sun sets right through that window," he said. They waited as the afternoon light slanted lower, and for a few breathtaking moments, a beam of golden sunlight pierced through the grimy glass and landed on a single, unadorned floorboard. Working together, they pried it up. Underneath, they didn't find gold, but another small, carved symbol, a crescent moon, and a single, rolled-up blueprint. Alani carefully unfurled it. It was a diagram for the mansion's original dumbwaiter system, but with one of the shafts marked with a small, hand-drawn star. Their days were filled with these small victories. They laughed as they struggled to manually operate the creaking dumbwaiter. They shared pizza sitting on the floor of the grand ballroom, their voices echoing in the vast space. Alani, the woman who lived in a sterile, white world, found herself with dust on her trousers and a genuine smile on her face. She taught Leo how to identify different types of wood grains, and she showed Maya how to make charcoal rubbings of the intricate carvings they found. One evening, As the kids dozed in the back seat of his car before the drive home, Gabe and Alani stood on the porch, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight. "I haven't felt like this in a long time," Alani said softly, her gaze on the darkening trees. "Like I'm a part of something, not just an observer." "Me neither," Gabe admitted. "For the last few years, I've just been getting by, trying not to sink. This house, it feels like I'm finally swimming somewhere." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You're a good man, Gabe Trinidad. A good father. Elias Thorne would have liked you." The quiet sincerity of her words was a balm on a wound he'd carried for years. He felt a powerful, magnetic pull toward her, an urge to close the small distance between them. It was more than a shared purpose. It was a deep, growing affection, as real and solid as the stone foundation beneath their feet. The moment was perfect, fragile, and full of unspoken promise. And that was when the headlights appeared. A sleek, black SUV, the kind that cost more than Gabe made in 2 years, crunched aggressively up the gravel driveway. It parked behind Alani's sedan, boxing them in. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged, his expensive suit and polished shoes utterly alien in the rustic setting. It was Mark Jennings. His smug, predatory smile was a physical blow. "Well, well, well," he said, his eyes flicking from Gabe to Alani and back again, taking in their closeness with a dismissive smirk. "Having a little camp out at the money pit. How quaint." Gabe's entire body went rigid. The fragile peace shattered instantly. "What are you doing here, Mark?" "Business," Mark said, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. "I was doing a little digging. Turns out your great-aunt Elspeth wasn't exactly a financial wizard. She took out a rather substantial line against this property years ago to cover some, let's call them personal debts. A line that my firm has just acquired, which makes me the primary creditor." He waved the papers triumphantly. "This folly, as you call it, is more mine than it is yours." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a cruel, conspiratorial whisper meant for both of them to hear. "And you," he said, looking at Alani, "you must be the historian I heard about. Letting this guy string you along with some fantasy about hidden treasure?" He chuckled. "Let me tell you about Gabe's business acumen. You should ask him about the book nook. A little passion project he drove straight into bankruptcy. Lost his wife's entire savings. The man's a dreamer. An incompetent one." The words hit Gabe like a physical assault. The old shame, the one he thought he was finally escaping, came flooding back, hot and suffocating. He saw the flicker of doubt in Alani's eyes, the way her posture stiffened, her professional guard slamming back into place. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice quiet, her gaze fixed on Gabe. It wasn't an accusation, but it was a question that hung in the air like a guillotine. Gabe couldn't speak. He just gave a small, defeated nod. The story was true, and Mark's poison had found its mark. He saw himself through her eyes now, not the steadfast heart, but the failed dreamer. The man who breaks everything he touches. Mark smiled, sensing victory. "I'm giving you one chance, Gabe. Sign the property over to me. I'll forgive the debt, and you can walk away with your dignity. What's left of it, anyway?" Alani took a step back, putting a careful clinical distance between herself and Gabe. She looked from Mark's predatory grin to Gabe's crushed expression. The easy camaraderie, the shared laughter, the quiet moment on the porch, it all felt like a lie. She had allowed herself to believe in the story, to believe in him. She had let emotion cloud her judgment, just as she'd sworn she never would again. The house was a money pit. The man was a failed dreamer. The facts, cold and hard, were reasserting their control. I should go, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth it had held just moments before. She turned without another glance at Gabe, got into her car, and drove away, leaving him alone on the porch with his tormentor and the ruins of the hope he had so carefully begun to build. The bond had been forged, and in a single, brutal moment, it had been shattered. The taillights of Alani's sedan disappeared down the dark country road, and with them went the last of Gabe's strength. The night grew cold, the silence of the woods pressing in, heavy and suffocating. Mark stood there, a vulture in a tailored suit, the lion papers held out like a death warrant. "The pen, Gabe," Mark said, his voice slick with finality. "Or the lawyers. Your choice." Defeat was a bitter, familiar taste in Gabe's mouth. Mark was right. He was a dreamer. He had failed at the bookstore. He had failed his marriage, and now he was failing this house, this legacy. Alani's retreat was the final confirmation. She, the woman of facts and evidence, had seen the truth of him and walked away. He was about to give in, to sign away the one thing that had made him feel whole again, when a small voice cut through the darkness. "Don't, Dad." Gabe turned. Leo was standing in the open doorway of the station wagon, his young face set with a fierce, protective determination. He held the tycoon's journal in his hands, clutching it like a shield. "He wrote it right here," Leo said, his voice trembling but clear. He shone his phone's flashlight onto a page, his finger tracing a line of elegant, faded script. "Fortune favors the heart that persists." He didn't mean money, Dad. He meant not giving up. "Don't let this guy win." The words, spoken by his son, landed with more force than all of Mark's insults. Gabe looked at Leo, then at the looming silhouette of the mansion. It wasn't just a house. It was a test of the heart. Elias Thorne had lost his love because he gave up the fight. Was Gabe going to make the same mistake? A spark of defiance, buried deep under the weight of his shame, rekindled. He looked straight at Mark, his shoulders straightening. "No," Gabe said, the word quiet but unshakable. "Get off my property." Mark laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Your property? We'll see about that." "See you in court, dreamer." He got back into his SUV, spun the tires in the gravel, and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and derision in his wake. Gabe was left alone in the silence, his son by his side. He was terrified. He had no money, no plan, and the woman he was falling for thought he was a fraud. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't defeated. He had made a choice. He had chosen to persist. Meanwhile, Alani was driving, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She was fleeing. Fleeing the house, fleeing Gabe, but most of all, fleeing the hope that had felt so warm and so dangerous. Mark's words echoed in her head, feeding the cynical, guarded part of her that she had built up for protection. A dreamer. An incompetent one. It was the story of her own past, of a man whose charming dreams had left her with a shattered heart and a mountain of debt. She had been a fool to let her guard down again. She pulled into a brightly lit gas station, her mind a whirlwind of conflict. She sat in her car, wanting to keep driving until the mansion was just a distant memory. But her eyes fell on the passenger seat, where the high-resolution photos of the mansion's secrets still lay in a folder. On top was a picture she'd taken of Elias Thorne's journal, open to the final page. Her training, her historian's instinct, forced her to read the words again. "Let my fortune not go to the cleverest mind, but to the most steadfast heart." Let it find someone who is willing to fix that which is broken. Then she thought of Mark, his greed, his cold, calculating cruelty. He was the modern embodiment of the very men Thorne despised, the men who had stolen his Isabel. And Gabe? He wasn't a slick talker or a ruthless businessman. He was a man who gave his lunch to a hungry student, a man who shielded his children with his own body, a man whose hands, gentle and kind, had worked tirelessly to patch a roof and decipher a blueprint, not for greed, but for the sheer love of the story. The realization hit her like a lightning strike. The business failure, the so-called incompetence, that wasn't the defining fact of Gabe's character. It was a footnote. The real evidence was in his actions, his quiet persistence, his steadfast heart. She had been so afraid of being hurt again that she had mistaken a wound for a flaw. She had judged the book by its tattered cover, not by the beautiful, resilient story inside. She had to make a choice. Trust the painful echoes of her past, or trust the man she had come to know in the dusty, magical halls of Thorne Manor. Without another moment's hesitation, she started the car, spun it around, and raced back toward the mansion. She wasn't just a historian anymore. She was a believer. When she pulled up the driveway, she found Gabe and Leo on the porch, a single flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Gabe looked up, his face a mixture of shock and fragile hope. "I was wrong," Eleni said, walking toward him, her voice clear and strong. "What Mark did that was a test, and I failed it. But Thorne's journal wasn't just about you, Gabe. It was about anyone who reads it. It asks us to see past the decay, to believe in what's hidden underneath. I'm choosing to believe. In the house. And in you." Tears welled in Gabe's eyes. He had persisted, and she had returned. "There's one last clue," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He pointed to the final line in the journal, which Leo was still holding. "Where my love first saw the stars, there you will find my heart." Isabel was an astronomer, Alani breathed. Where would she have seen the stars? Their eyes went simultaneously to the one place they hadn't fully explored, the crumbling, glass-domed observatory on the roof. They raced up the grand, treacherous staircase, adrenaline fueling their ascent. They scrambled up a narrow ladder and pushed open a heavy trapdoor, emerging into a circular room walled with curved panes of broken glass. In the center stood a massive, antique brass telescope, green with verdigris, aimed at the heavens. The room was a wreck, but the telescope itself was intact. At its base, etched into the metal, was the final carving, a stylized sun, the one from the center of the star chart. Following a sudden instinct, Gabe twisted it. With a low groan of metal on metal, a hidden compartment in the telescope's heavy iron pedestal clicked open. It wasn't filled with gold or jewels. It was filled with dozens of thick, vellum envelopes, sealed with wax. Gabe picked one up. It was a stock certificate, dated 1898, for the Thorne Transcontinental Railroad. He picked up another and another. They were all there, the original, uncashed, foundational shares of an empire that had shaped the nation. A fortune that had been sitting dormant for over a century, accumulating value beyond anyone's wildest imagination. $500 million, Alani whispered, her voice full of awe. Maybe more. He left you the heart of his entire empire. Mark's line was now laughably insignificant. The family who mocked him would be stunned into silence. But as Gabe stood there, holding the proof of his vindication, he wasn't looking at the certificates. He was looking at Alani, her face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the broken dome, her eyes shining with pride for him. He looked at Leo, who was beaming, and thought of Maya, asleep in the car, safe. Months later, the mansion stood not as a ruin, but as a masterpiece reborn. Scaffolding had been replaced by fresh paint. The roof was whole, the windows sparkled, and the gardens were coming back to life. On the wide, restored wraparound porch, a new family stood together. Gabe, no longer a substitute, was the director of the new Thorn Historical Foundation. Alani was its head curator. Leo was using the brass telescope, now fully restored, to look at the stars. Maya ran across the new lawn, her laughter echoing in the evening air. Gabe turned to Alani and took her hand. Their fingers intertwined, a perfect, comfortable fit. He had inherited a fortune, but he had found his treasure right here, on this porch. He had fixed that which was broken, not just in the house, but in himself. He would be happy, Alani said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Elias Thorn. He finally got his wish. Gabe smiled, looking at the warm light glowing from the windows of their home. He wasn't the only one. Watching Gabe and Alani find their way back to each other, a family in the truest sense, reminds us that real wealth is never just about money. It's about trust, forgiveness, and building a home in someone's heart. What do you think is the most valuable thing a person can inherit? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that touch the heart. See you tomorrow.